Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Niu Qian and Tai Tan didn't see him again. Instead, they had Clear Sky sect disciples escort him out of Clear Sky Castle. Huo Yuhao stepped out of Clear Sky Castle and watched its large gates close. He took a deep breath and swore to himself that he would have the strength of a titled Dolor when he returned the next time. It would be best if he could bring Dorma back with him at that time. He tapped his foot on the ground and leapt down from Clear Sky Peak, just like that. He bounced off the side of the mountain continuously, as he rushed down as quickly as he could. He plummeted through the clouds before he extended his flying-type soul tool and activated his soul power, transforming into a ray of flowing light, as he disappeared into the distance. Back inside Clear Sky Castle, Niu Qian and Tai Tan watched Huo Yuhao leave, as they stood by the window in the highest room in the castle. They wore different expressions on their faces. Tai Tan looked a little gloomy. Evidently, he hadn't gotten over the fight he had just had with Huo Yuhao. He muttered under his breath, "Life has been hard on this guy. But his mind seems a lot more resilient and resolute than last time." Niu Qian's face was full of admiration and appreciation. Yes. It wasn't easy for him to become like that at such an age. Hopefully, he can meet that fellow's requirements as quickly as possible. In truth, I can't bear to watch this kid being tortured like this. Dorma, I mean our little phoenix, I wonder what she's doing at the moment. I'm hoping that they can meet each other outside. Tai Tan said, "That fellow is so cruel. He has quite some skill at torturing people, but do you think our sister knows about this?" Niu Qian chuckled and said, "It would be strange if he dared to tell her. However, I can understand what he's feeling. He's a man, and when the daughter you love most is being stolen by another man, your mood can't be too good." Huo Yuhao didn't proceed towards Shrek Academy after he left the Clear Sky sect. Right now, he was overwhelmed with emotions, and not just because he had received the good news that Dorma had recovered. He was also excited because of what he was going to do next. He had to stop and rest after every 2 hours, because of the state his body was currently in. He found a small city when night fell and stayed the night in a hotel. He continued on his way when dawn broke the next day. He took another 4 hours before he finally left the Heavenly Soul Empire's borders and entered the Star Luo Empire's borders. He went straight for the Star Luo Empire's capital city, Star Luo City. It was midday before Star Luo City was within sight. Huo Yuhao slowed down, descended from the sky and landed on the ground. Star Luo City was the Star Luo Empire's capital, and their air defenses were very tight and strict. He could run into trouble at any moment within 50 kilometers of Star Luo City, so Huo Yuhao landed on the ground well before that. Furthermore, he didn't have to go into Star Luo City to reach his destination. Huo Yuhao found a quiet and isolated place that was devoid of people and removed his flying-type soul tool. He withdrew everything that was relatively eye-catching from his body and placed them into his storage-type soul ring. He turned his ring around so that his starlight sapphire was facing his palm. Unless he opened his hand for others to look at, nobody would see the dazzling jewel. He removed Shrek's uniform and put on some hemp clothes before he took out a series of bottles and cans of paints and creams. Changing his appearance was part of the training he had received during the Ultimate Soldier plan. Even though he felt a little unfamiliar with the process as he put on his disguise, his standards were still there. It didn't take long to change his appearance to that of an unassuming youth who seemed as typical as could be. He looked very simple and honest, and very modest at the same time. He looked like he was a little over 20 years old. His appearance was the kind that was hard to distinguish in a crowd of people. Huo Yuhao inspected his appearance after making himself up, and nodded satisfactorily before he began walking towards Star Luo City. However, his destination wasn't Star Luo City. He didn't use soul power, so he didn't move that quickly. After about 1 hour, a bunch of structures entered his vision. Huo Yuhao immediately stopped in his tracks when he saw these structures. He clenched his fists slowly and pressed his lips tightly together. Where was this? This place used to be his home. The White Tiger Duke's residence, the place he had sworn to come back to so that he could avenge his mother. Ever since his mother had passed away, this place was no longer his home. Instead, this had become a place where his enemies lived. The White Tiger Duke, Dai Yueheng, and Dai Huabin's faces swiftly surfaced in his mind. The hatred and vengeance that Huo Yuhao had suppressed deep within his heart instantly erupted like a fountain. I'm back, mother. Even though I'm not strong enough yet, I will be in the future, and I will definitely avenge you for good. He picked up his pace as he walked briskly towards the White Tiger Duke's residence. Of course, he wouldn't enter the White Tiger Duke's mansion. Instead, he proceeded towards a small patch of hills to the side that bordered the White Tiger Duke's residence. Huo Yuhao had grown up in this place, and he was still very familiar with it even though he hadn't been back here for many years. He quickly found his destination. A tall gravestone appeared in the distance. This gravestone was at least 2 meters tall, and both wide and spacious. Its surroundings were renovated and ornamented with granite, and seemed fine and exquisite. There were even carvings of the emperor beast on the gravestone's surface, watching over the one interred there. There was a grave behind this stone, also constructed from granite. Huo Yuhao's eyes grew wet when he saw this gravestone. He took a few quick steps forward, and the writing on the gravestone's surface was clearly presented to him. The grave of my wife, Huo Yun. Dai Hao's name was etched below this inscription. This was the grave of Huo Yuhao's mother, but it was very different from when he had departed this place. Back then, he was still young and didn't have the means to give his mother a grand burial. He could only use a wooden grave marker that he had carved and sculpted with his own hands and some lace. At this moment, his mother's gravestone had been renovated, but it was still located where it used to be. However, it looked entirely different from before. He had not been back here before, and now someone had renovated his mother's grave. Huo Yuhao was a little dazed as he slowly knelt down in front of his mother's gravestone. The roiling hatred and vengeance in his heart subconsciously dampened, but tears surged out uncontrollably as he placed his head down in front of his mother's gravestone and sobbed loudly. Mom! Mom, I'm back. I'm here to see you. Huo Yuhao had been gone for so many years, and this was the first time that he had returned to pay respects to his mother. His heart was full of guilt. Huo Yuhao had become increasingly powerful over the years and had worked so hard that he almost didn't rest at all. He didn't even dare to think about his mother, because he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to resist the impulse to avenge her. More than 8 years had gone by since he had left this place. Huo Yuhao had transformed from a weak child to a powerful soul sage with twin martial souls after 8 years, and everything had changed. He finally had the courage to come back and pay his respects to his mother. His greatest wish was to avenge his mother, and for the White Tiger Duke, Dai Hao, to kneel in front of his mother's grave and repent. His mother's grave had been renovated, and Dai Hao had rebuilt her gravestone and called her his wife. That was always what Mom wanted the most. But why didn't Dai Hao do that for her all those years ago? He never visited us, and you had to die so violently in the end. Huo Yuhao's longing and yearning for his mother, and the grief carried deep within his heart surged forth continuously, and manifested as tears that splattered all over his mother's gravestone. The pressure that he had to bear in his heart over these days, his longing for Donga, and his guilt towards Chua seemed to be released through his bitter sobs as his tears flowed uncontrollably. Huo Yuhao laid down on his mother's gravestone and fell asleep at some point, and this nap was exceptionally sound and steady. He had a dream. He dreamed that his mother was back, and the White Tiger Duke had his hand wrapped around his mother's waist. The White Tiger Duke had a warm and faint smile on his face. He softly called out her name, while his mother's expression was full of bliss and happiness, as she leaned into the White Tiger Duke's embrace. Unfortunately, it was all just a dream. Dawn broke on the second day when Huo Yuhao woke up from his dream. His clothes were wet from morning dew, but he felt as if all his grief and despondency had drained out through his tears. Huo Yuhao knelt down in front of his mother's gravestone again, and kowtowed 9 times solemnly. Huo Yuhao lowered his voice and said, "Don't worry, mother. I will always remember this hatred, and I will prove to that person that your son is stronger than he is. I can do what he can, and one day, I will return to this place, the White Tiger Duke's mansion, rightfully and fairly, and I will tread on every single one of them. I will make everyone repay you with 10 times, 100 times the hurt that they caused you. I will force the White Tiger Duke to welcome you back into the White Tiger Duke's mansion, and admit that you are his official wife. I will force him to kneel down before your grave to repent." Huo Yuhao took out the offerings that he had prepared after his speech and laid them out before his mother's grave, one by one. He kowtowed heavily a few more times before he stood up. He turned away, yet glanced at his mother's gravestone, because he couldn't bear to leave. He wiped the tears from his face, and his eyes became resolute and determined once more as he strode off into the distance. He didn't proceed towards Star Luo City. Instead, he picked up his pace as he traveled west. He ran some distance before unleashing his flying-type soul tool and flying rapidly into the distance. After 2 hours, he stopped at a mid-sized city within the Star Luo Empire. He created a new identity for himself and purchased documents for 30 golden soul coins, having a light meal before he resumed his journey. Imperial Radiant City was located in the Star Luo Empire's northwestern corner, and was less than 100 kilometers away from the Mingdo mountain range. It was less than 500 kilometers from the Heavenly Soul Empire's borders, and was one of the Star Luo Empire's important strongholds to defend against the Sun Moon Empire. This city was one of the most important cities in charge of resupply for the front-line camps. There were 2 reserve legions stationed in this city. Reserve legions typically had 1.5 times the troops that regular legions had, and they went through tough and strict training, just like the regular legions. As soon as the regular legions suffered losses on the front lines, these reserve legions would muster the soldiers to replenish the regular legions. Imperial Radiant City's reserves were fully enlisted. The White Tiger Duke was the Western Field Army's marshal, and they might face the Sun Moon Empire's great army at any moment. Nobody dared to slack off or mess around in this place. Therefore, Imperial Radiant City's 2 reserve legions were at their full strength of 15,000 men. They could send soldiers to the front lines within 4 hours as long the front lines needed them to. Imperial Radiant City was also an important granary for the Western Corps. The city's walls were tough and thick, and its security was tight and strict. Everything was handled by the White Tiger Duke's most trusted subordinates. These 2 reserve legions were collectively known as the Western Field Army, and were individually known as the 4th Reserve Legion and the 6th Reserve Legion. Recently, these 2 armies had started recruiting new soldiers, because a batch of overage soldiers had retired from the army. The Sun Moon Empire was a great threat, so the Star Luo Empire had cast a wide net for enlisting new blood. This was especially true for veterans who had been to war before, and the Empire retained them by treating them extremely well. But even so, humans had to grow old in the end. The bodies of normal humans would start to age more rapidly after they passed 40, and it became very hard for them to maintain the required condition in the army. A batch of veterans would inevitably retire every year from both the regular army and the reserves. New soldiers would have to be recruited to replace those veterans who had retired. The Western Field Army's 6th Reserve Legion was currently recruiting those new soldiers. The 4th Reserve had stopped recruiting just yesterday. Because the atmosphere at the borders were tense, many families from cities along the borders weren't willing to let their children enlist. If their children became soldiers, there was a chance that they would step onto the battlefield, and that meant they could be in danger. Therefore, the 4th Reserve Legion's recruitment hadn't been that successful. However, recruitment had its benefits. It was the best way for people mired in poverty to become rich by accomplishing meritorious deeds, and service in the army was the fastest shortcut to rising in social rank. Therefore, there were some youngsters who believed their bodies were sturdy enough, and were brave enough to come forward to join the army. The 6th Reserve Legion was stationed on the western side of Imperial Radiant City. The place where they were recruiting new soldiers faced Imperial Radiant City's gate, and everybody moving in or out of the city could clearly see the Legion's booth. At this moment, several veterans were hollering constantly at youngsters who were walking along the streets. The 6th Reserve Legion is recruiting soldiers. You will be given generous compensation and salaries. 4 silver soul coins are given every month as a soldier's pay, and we will never lower that amount. You will get 3 meals a day, and 2 meals are guaranteed to contain meat. Uniforms and weapons will be assigned immediately after you pass an audit. Becoming a soldier is a glorious endeavor. You will be protecting the Empire. You are welcome to join the 6th Reserve Legion. These veterans' words were effective, to a certain extent. Many youngsters who were willing to enlist hailed from poor families, and a soldier's pay and food were what they hoped for most. Once they enlisted, they would be given a month's pay, and this amount was enough to change their family's life for quite some time. A long queue stretched out in front of the recruitment booth. There were 20-some young and fit men attempting to enlist in the army. The recruitment booth's setup was simple. 2 veterans sat behind a long desk, along with a middle-aged man who looked like an officer. However, everyone could tell from his uniform that his rank wasn't that high, even if he was an officer. Name: Ge Dazhuang. Age: 23. Please show me your identification document, the officer said to the youth in front of him. The youth hurriedly passed a small booklet over. In the Star Luo Empire, everyone had an identification document assigned by the military, and there were simple watermarks along with a seal unique to the city that each citizen was born in. Forging and replicating such documents was relatively complicated. Furthermore, the military could conduct investigations using these identification documents when absolutely necessary. Go over there. Find a stone weight that you can lift for us to see. The officer pointed to a pile of stone weights nearby. There were about a dozen of them. The largest weight was about the size of a millstone, while the smallest one was at least 20 kilograms. The recruitment assessment was very simple. New soldiers had their strength assessed, and they would have to go through boot camp. New soldiers who hadn't gone through at least 1 year of training weren't allowed onto the battlefield unless they displayed exceptional prowess. Yes. Ji Dazhuang acknowledged loudly and hurriedly ran over to the pile of stone weights. He weighed several different weights before he found a relatively large one, flexed his arms, and lifted it. Ji Dazhuang exclaimed as he gradually lifted the weight into the air. His face was flushed, and it seemed like he was putting in a lot of effort, but he managed to lift the stone lock above his head in the end. This measurement was considered complete once the recruit raised a weight over his head. Yes, not bad. You're quite strong. You have passed. Work hard in the future. The 6th Reserve Legion is where talents are produced. If you are lucky enough to go to the front lines, you might even get to accomplish glorious military feats. The officer picked up a wooden card that read, Private, from the table and handed it to Ji Dazhuang as he finished speaking. Ji Dazhuang hurriedly thanked the officer with a smile on his face. He could redeem a month's worth of soldiers' pay from the quartermaster with this wooden card, before he would be assigned a uniform and a weapon. Most of the youths who came afterwards passed the assessment. Only an excessively skinny youth couldn't even lift the lightest weight, and was turned away. Next. The officer seemed a little sleepy, as he leaned back in his chair and hollered lazily. A tall and lanky youth walked in front of him, and produced his identification document. The officer could tell that this youth was quite smart and clever. He picked up this youth's documents and said, Tang Dong, from Four Leaves City. Born into a farmer's family. How old are you? Tang Dong seemed a little inarticulate. He lowered his head and said, Sir, I'm 19 years old. The officer was pleased to be addressed as Sir. He said to Tang Dong, Go and lift a stone weight. Yes. Tang Dong walked to the pile of stone locks. He hesitated momentarily before he walked to the stone weight that was about as large as a millstone, weighing almost 100 kilos. Tang Dong gripped the stone weight with both hands and exerted the strength in his legs, as he suddenly raised the weight into the air. He swayed a little before swinging the weight and raising it above his head. The officer was taken aback. Tang Dong placed the stone weight back down on the ground. His face seemed a little flushed, probably because of the strength that he had just displayed. Not bad, not bad. You don't seem very robust, but you are quite strong. Not even I can lift the largest weight. You have a future. You have passed. Come, take this. He retrieved a golden card from the small stack of them on the table, and passed it to Tang Dong. This golden card had, Private First Class, engraved on its surface. In the Star Luo Empire's army, privates had the lowest rank, followed by Private First Class. It was a clear and important gap between the lowest and the second lowest rank. Privates First Class were treated a lot better than normal privates. They were assigned normal uniforms, and were equipped with simple leather armor and a spear. They were given 6 silver soul coins every month, while privates were only given 4. Privates were only given cloth uniforms and a simple knife. Thank you, sir, Tang Dong replied gratefully, taking the golden card and proceeding to the barracks. Tang Dong saw a sign with quartermaster written on it stuck in the ground once he walked into the barracks, and there was also an arrow pointing in a certain direction. Tang Dong paused in his tracks, and a disappointed look appeared on his face before he strode in the direction the arrow was pointing. Tang Dong. Tang from the Tang sect, and Dong from Wang Donga. Wasn't this seemingly honest and simple youth Huo Yuhao, who had just left the Clear Sky sect and just paid his respects to his mother? Yes, the Star Luo Empire's barracks were his destination. He had made this decision long ago in his heart, and he wanted to use his own abilities, just like the White Tiger Duke did all those years ago. He wanted to accumulate merit bit by bit, and reach a high rank. He wanted to use his own strength to prove that he was stronger than the White Tiger Duke. He wanted to stand in front of the White Tiger Duke righteously one day, and he wanted to use his own merit to reach a rank even higher than the White Tiger Duke's rank. He would reveal his identity when that happened, and he would use his own status within the Star Luo Empire to clear his mother's name and avenge her. He didn't care about power and authority. However, he understood that no matter how strong he was individually, all he could do with his own strength was kill someone if he wanted to avenge his mother. That wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to use his own accomplishments for the Empire to clear his mother's name and seek justice for her. He wanted his mother to feel rightfully proud because of him, so that she could rightfully be called the White Tiger Duke's wife. Huo Yuhao wasn't willing to take any shortcuts. His reputation was starting to stand out in the continent, and as long as he was willing to, it wasn't impossible for him to directly become a high-ranking officer in the Star Luo Empire's military. However, that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to take the same path the White Tiger Duke did. The Star Luo Empire was his country, and even though this empire had never given him anything, this place was his ancestral home. He wanted to use his own merits to rise through the ranks. After all, he was the Spirit Pagoda's honorary pagoda master, and also a lifetime member, and he enjoyed a substantial status in Shrek Academy and the Tang sect. If he appeared in the Star Luo Empire with his own identity, he could even affect the Doluo continent's three native empires' overall situation, even if that sounded like a far-fetched notion. Huo Yuhao's personal strength was nothing much to the three empires. However, the powers he represented were too strong. Therefore, when he went into closed-door cultivation, he decided that he would use an all-new identity to achieve what he wanted. And so, Tang Dong was born. The quartermaster was a fatty, and Huo Yuhao could tell that he had quite a lot to eat every day. The man was a little shocked when he saw Huo Yuhao's private, first-class card, but he still gave Huo Yuhao the equipment and compensation that a private first class should receive, and told Huo Yuhao to report to the military drill grounds on the left side of the army barracks. The Star Luo Empire was wealthy, and one could tell that they were a class above the rest from the equipment they gave their soldiers. The leather armor was made from treated cowhide. Even though this leather armor could only protect one's torso, it was enough to give the soldier a sense of safety after donning it. The spear was about 12 feet long, and made from a very flexible white wood. The spear's steel tip was half a meter long, and it sparkled with chilly light, without a single inch of rust. Soldiers were given 2 uniforms, which were made from decent canvas. The uniform was extremely tough, and even though wearing one wasn't very comfortable, the uniform was definitely durable and resistant to wear and tear. Huo Yuhao changed into his uniform and his leather armor on the spot, grabbing his other uniform with his left hand and his spear with his right hand before he jogged towards the drill grounds on the left side of the army camp. The drill ground was very spacious. Huo Yuhao almost couldn't see the end of it. There were phalanxes hard at work on the drill ground, and cavalry companies riding left and right. The 6th Reserve Legion's soldiers were clearly training hard. The Star Luo Empire's military system was arranged in ascending order: small team, medium team, large team, battalion, division and legion. A small team had 10 people. A medium team was made up of 5 small teams, for a total of 50 people. A large team was composed of 3 medium teams, for a total of 150 people, while a battalion contained 3 large teams, for a total of 450 people. A division consisted of 3 battalions, with a total of 1,350 people, while a regular legion consisted of 6 divisions, 7,210 soldiers. Adding in transportation units and logistics units, as well as other auxiliary units, a legion contained about 10,000 people in total. The reserves were a little different. Every reserve legion consisted of 9 divisions of soldiers, and in addition to other auxiliary units, a reserve legion had about 15,000 people. Huo Yuhao quickly found the assembly point for new soldiers, because the veteran soldiers who were undergoing training here were in strict formation and seemed very intimidating. On the other hand, several hundred new soldiers were assembled not far from where he was, and they seemed a lot more relaxed and loose in comparison. They didn't stand properly, their postures were loose and undisciplined, and there were even people who loafed at the back, or were sitting down on the ground. Huo Yuhao hurriedly ran over once he found this group. There were 3 men standing in front of those new soldiers, who looked like officers. Distinguishing officers was very simple. Those who wore golden armor were definitely officers, and were at least medium team leaders. Soldiers like Huo Yuhao, who were also wearing a private first-class leather armor, would typically become small team leaders. Medium team leaders wore chainmail armor, and only large team leaders or officers ranking higher than large team leaders could wear plate armor. Officers like battalion commanders, division commanders, and legion commanders wore armor that was made from a different material. They were distinguished from each other with special markings, such as the color of the plume feathers on their helmets, or the color of their capes, the equipment of their bodyguards, etc. The bodyguards of the Western Field Army's Marshal, White Tiger Duke Huo Yuhao, had all been wearing chainmail armor. This meant that they were all at least medium team leaders. Recruit Tang Dong, reporting. Huo Yuhao walked briskly up before those three officers. He didn't know any military salutes, but he knew how to stand at attention. All three officers were wearing chainmail armor. When they saw the leather armor on Huo Yuhao's body, their faces showed some surprise. The officer, who was standing in the middle, had a tough and muscular frame, and seemed to be around 30 years old. He said, You must be the one who became a private first class. Seems like your physique isn't bad. Your name's Tang Dong, right? Come here. He waved at Huo Yuhao. Huo Yuhao quickly took a few steps forward and arrived in front of the three officers. Huo Yuhao's consciousness twitched, but he couldn't feel any soul power undulations from these three officers. Officers were typically promoted for two different reasons. The first was a promotion from an accumulation of military merits, while the second was promotion from an increase in fighting strength. However, officers who rose through the ranks, because of their fighting strength, typically didn't become commanders. Normal soldiers also had chances to become high-ranking officers, and would have to accumulate military merit. However, their rise through the ranks was a lot more challenging compared to Soul Masters. In the end, a Soul Master was considered the most exalted and powerful profession on the Doluo continent. No matter how much effort a normal person put in, he would almost certainly be defeated and killed by a Soul Master if he fought one alone on the battlefield. The officer scrutinized Huo Yuhao for a few moments. He couldn't tell from Huo Yuhao's appearance how he was any different from a normal person. He frowned and said, Tang Dong, how did you become a private first class? Huo Yuhao smiled simply and honestly and said, Sir, I am quite strong, and the recruiting officer let me become a private first class because of that. You're strong. Come, let's try. He reached out toward Huo Yuhao with his right hand as he spoke. Huo Yuhao switched his spear to his left hand and draped his uniform over his left arm, so that he could free up his right hand. Huo Yuhao's right hand gripped the officer's right hand, and the officer's palm immediately contracted as a wave of strength considered quite strong for normal people compressed Huo Yuhao's right hand. But how could this little bit of strength be anything to Huo Yuhao? He didn't even have to use any soul power. His physique was already much stronger than normal people. Huo Yuhao didn't push back. Instead, he let the officer twist and clutch as much as and however he wanted. The officer felt as if Huo Yuhao's palm was made from steel, and he couldn't make Huo Yuhao move an inch no matter how much strength he used. Very strong. This officer didn't continue the contest. These lower-ranked officers were all veterans in the army, and he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of so many recruits. He tested Huo Yuhao for a moment more before he released his grip, and gestured at the recruits in front of him. Join the formation. Yes, sir. Huo Yuhao acknowledged as he turned and jogged into the recruits' ranks. Most of these recruits had curious and novel looks on their faces. Everybody watched the other soldiers train not far from where they were. Some of them were rubbing their fists, and some were so lazy and idle that they were lying around in different positions. Everyone was in a different position. However, the officers didn't say anything to restrict them. They were just standing in front of everyone and speaking softly, chattering amongst themselves. Their behavior could confuse others, but how could they confuse the eye of the Azura Huo Yuhao, whose spiritual power was already in the concrete material realm? Huo Yuhao paid a little more attention, and discovered that although these three officers seemed like they didn't care about those recruits, but in reality, their attention was indeed focused on the recruits, and their eyes became sharp and focused from time to time as they observed them. Naturally, Huo Yuhao didn't remind the recruits behind him. Instead, he stood up straight near the edge of the formation, and didn't move an inch as he waited calmly. New soldiers continued streaming in and adding themselves into the formation, and this group of recruits became larger and larger. They were around 500 in total when noon arrived. One of the three officers suddenly turned and jogged away. It didn't take long before another officer wearing sparkling silver steel plate armor was escorted back by the officer who had jogged away in front of these recruits. This new officer's aura was conspicuously different. He was tall, and his rectangular face had hints of majesty and dignity. These recruits had been standing around for a long time, and they were already wandering in all directions, but they shaped up a little now. Even they could tell that this new officer was quite a high-ranking one. The officer planted himself in front of those 500 recruits. The officer in chainmail armor, who had just wrestled with Huo Yuhao, suddenly hollered at the top of his voice, "Squad, attention." He was very loud, and his voice sounded like rolling thunder. Many recruits were startled by his voice and shivered in response. Everyone actually quieted down within a few moments. The officer in plate armor surveyed the recruits as he lowered his voice and said, "Listen up. From the moment that you enlisted into the 6th Reserve Legion, you've become one of the Star Luo Empire's glorious soldiers. A soldier's sacred duty is to follow orders, and a soldier that fails to follow this rule will be dealt with according to military law. I am Zhuang Qian, the large team leader of the 2nd Large Team of the 3rd Battalion of the 6th Reserve Legion's 7th Division. You recruits will be under my charge over the next 3 months. Now, your bunks will be assigned, and your tasks delegated. Fighting soldiers will stand to my left after this, and auxiliary soldiers will stand to my right." This speech sounded very simple, but it emanated a somber sternness. This large team member was a soldier who had been on the battlefield and seen blood before. His ferocious aura instantly sent chills down the recruits' spines. This officer waved his hand, and the officer in chainmail armor immediately took a few steps forward. He took out a name list from somewhere and raised his voice as he read, "Tang Dong, fighting soldier. In charge of the bunk for Large Team 1. Huo Yuhao hadn't expected his name to be called out first, but his reactions were quick, and he instantly ran to the large team leader's left side and stood at attention. He was standing up straight and didn't move a muscle, just as he had been doing, but his expression was a little foolish and naive from beginning to end. Names were called out one after another, and more people quickly stood behind Huo Yuhao. However, some soldiers appeared on the other side, and the recruits who were assigned there had black faces. Auxiliary soldiers and fighting soldiers had very different statuses in the military. Under normal circumstances, only fighting soldiers could accumulate enough military merit to be promoted, while auxiliary soldiers would have far fewer chances. Many auxiliary soldiers seemed very unconvinced, but they didn't dare to protest, because they were intimidated by the large team leader's might. They just muttered under their breath. The officer took more than an hour to read through the list of 500 people. Huo Yuhao had been counting silently the entire time. In the end, 200 soldiers were assigned to be auxiliary soldiers, while 300 were chosen as fighting soldiers. The large team leader slowly turned around after the last recruit joined the line that he was supposed to. He turned towards the group of auxiliary soldiers as he lowered his voice and said, "Do you know why you guys are auxiliary soldiers? You have been selected after an integrated assessment. Everyone has been monitored and observed ever since you joined, and every word and every gesture that you made, along with your physique, were all part of this criteria. In the end, you guys aren't qualified to become fighting soldiers. Now, you have 2 choices. 1, remain as auxiliary soldiers. Auxiliary soldiers will receive the same pay as normal fighting soldiers, but it will be hard for you guys to get a promotion. 2nd, you can return everything that you've claimed from the quartermaster and leave the camp. But you have to remember, once you leave the camp, your names will be recorded, and the army will never take you in again. If you remain as auxiliary soldiers, you might have a chance to become a fighting soldier if your performance is outstanding. For now, you will be given 10 minutes to consider. I want an answer from everyone after 10 minutes. Zhuang Qian turned towards the 300 fighting soldiers, after he made his speech to the auxiliary soldiers. His face suddenly darkened as he said coldly, "Recruits. Don't think that everything is over just because you guys have been chosen as fighting soldiers. Let me tell you, in the basic military training that you will receive in the subsequent 3 months, you will be eliminated and demoted to an auxiliary soldier if you don't pass. Only those who pass this training with flying colors can become fighting soldiers. Don't think that I am being harsh. I am trying to be responsible for you and your family. Only the most outstanding soldiers are worthy of stepping onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you will only be going to your deaths. In that case, it's better for you to remain in the backlines or go back home to farm. You may return to your respective bunks that we have just assigned to take care of any arrangements there, and you may have lunch. Assemble here in 2 hours. This video will end here.